Welcome to the Blue Cafe. We offer stories of betrayal, infidelity, and redemption, raw, honest, and deeply human. Each episode dives into the tangled lives of those facing heartbreak and hard choices, where truth isn't always clean, but growth is always possible. Now on to today's story. Maple Ridge Misfire. Chapter 1. Hardware and Humdrum. Mark Turner wiped his hands on the faded sleeves of his work shirt and glanced around the cluttered aisles of Turner's Hardware. The familiar scent of sawdust and metal polish filled the air, mixed faintly with the unmistakable aroma of burnt coffee from the break room. It was Tuesday morning, slow and steady, just the way he liked it. A few regulars wandered through the store, Mrs. Hawkins hunting for the perfect paintbrush, Mr. Patel asking about lawnmower parts, and Mark greeted them all with his usual nod and subtle smile. At 42, Mark's life had settled into a steady rhythm. After years serving in the reserves, he'd hung up his uniform and taken over the small hardware store in Maple Ridge. It wasn't glamorous, but it was honest work, and it suited him just fine. The bell above the door jingled as the door swung open, and Mark looked up. Jess, his wife, breezed in wearing her usual workout gear. Bright leggings and a tank top emblazoned with the logo of the CrossFit gym downtown. Her hair was pulled back in a tight ponytail, and there was that familiar spark of energy in her eyes. "Morning, babe," Mark said, managing a tired but genuine smile. Jess smiled back, all pep and promise. "Morning. Just thought I'd drop by and grab some screws for the new shelf I'm building in the garage." Mark raised an eyebrow. "You sure you're not just making an excuse to come see Brandon?" Jess laughed, and the sound was light, but Mark caught a flicker of something else, a quick glance to the side, a small hesitation. He brushed it off. Maybe he was imagining things. As Jess grabbed the screws, Mark's phone buzzed quietly in his pocket. He pulled it out to see a text from Dave, his co-worker and self-appointed life coach. "You seen Jess's new workout, buddy? Heard he's a real piece of work." Mark's brow furrowed. Dave's idea of a joke was usually harmless, but something about the message niggled at him. He slipped the phone back into his pocket and forced a grin as Jess headed for the door. "See you tonight," she said, waving over her shoulder. Mark watched her go, the front door's bell chiming softly behind her. He sighed, the slow hum of the store suddenly feeling heavier. He wiped his hands again and glanced at the calendar on the wall. A reminder for the annual Maple Ridge Community Fitness Challenge. Maybe it was time to dust off his old reserves training and get moving again. Maybe. Chapter 2. The Rumblings. Mark sat behind the counter, sorting through a jumble of receipts and invoices, when the door jingled again. This time, it was Mr. Lewis, the town's unofficial newswire, partly retired postman, partly gossip hub. "Morning, Mark," Mr. Lewis said, setting down a weathered coffee cup. "Got a minute?" Heard some interesting chatter down at the diner. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Oh yeah? What kind of chatter?" "Well, you know Jess has been spending a lot of time at that CrossFit gym. Seems she's got herself a new coach. Brandon, they call him. Tall guy, cocky as a rooster at sunrise." Mark nodded slowly, trying not to show the flicker of discomfort rising in his chest. "Word is," Mr. Lewis continued, lowering his voice like he was sharing a state secret, "they've been seen a little too cozy. You know, extended sessions, lots of laughs, maybe more than just coaching." Mark cleared his throat and forced a chuckle. "Cozy, huh? Yeah. Now, don't take it the wrong way, but you might want to keep an eye on things. Maple Ridge is a small town. News travels faster than the speed of light." Mark thanked Mr. Lewis and watched as he shuffled out, the door's bell jingling behind him. His mind drifted back to Jess. Her easy smiles, her new obsession with fitness, and now Brandon, the cocky coach. A nagging thought settled in the pit of his stomach. He knew confrontation wasn't his style. Years of reserve training taught him patience and measured responses. But maybe it was time for a different approach. He glanced at the calendar on the wall again. The Community Fitness Challenge was only a month away. Mark smirked quietly to himself. If Brandon wanted a contest, maybe he'd get one. Chapter 3. Quiet Suspicions. Mark had never been one for drama. In fact, after years in the reserves, he prized calm, steady responses over loud confrontations. So when the whispers about Jess and Brandon started swirling, his first instinct wasn't to storm into the gym or confront his wife. Instead, he chose silence and observation. his personal brand of reconnaissance. That evening, Mark sat at the kitchen table, laptop open, a half-empty cup of lukewarm coffee beside him. He wasn't much of a tech guy, but he'd figured out how to find the CrossFit gym's schedule online. Class times, events, even photos of workouts posted to their Facebook page. He scanned through dozens of pictures, sweaty faces, strained muscles, and there, often Jess. Always smiling beside Brandon, the cocky coach with a permanent smirk and a CrossFit tattoo that looked like a war medal. Mark's fingers hovered over the keyboard. He considered sending Jess a message or asking Brandon some pointed questions, but quickly dismissed the idea. That wasn't his style, not yet. Instead, he began noting the gym's busiest hours and Brandon's coaching shifts. The next morning, Mark shared his findings with Dave over a breakfast sandwich at their favorite greasy spoon. "So you're telling me," Dave said between bites, "you're going to show up at the gym, undercover? Like some kind of fitness spy?" Mark shrugged, taking a sip of his coffee. "Something like that. I want to see what's going on firsthand." Dave's eyes widened. "Man, you're either brave or crazy. Or both." Mark smiled faintly. "I'm a reservist. I know how to keep a low profile. Just don't embarrass yourself," Dave warned, smirking. "Remember last time you tried yoga?" Mark rolled his eyes but didn't argue. There was work to do. Quiet work. Later that day, Mark stopped by the gym, not to join, just to watch from a distance. Through the window, he saw Jess laughing with Brandon, the kind of laugh that wasn't quite innocent. Mark clenched his jaw but forced himself to step back. Patience, he reminded himself. The game was just beginning. Chapter 4, Plan Forming. Mark sat at his kitchen table, pen tapping against a pad of paper, scribbling and crossing out ideas. The thought of walking into that CrossFit gym felt like stepping into a lion's den, but if he was going to play this right, he'd need a plan. A fake name, a new persona, and maybe a little gym savvy. He chuckled quietly to himself. Mike. Yeah, that had a nice ring to it. Simple, unassuming, forgettable. Next, the gear. Mark rummaged through his closet and pulled out a faded t-shirt from his reserve days, thinking it might lend some authenticity. He found an old gym bag in the garage and packed a water bottle, a towel, and a pair of trainers that had seen better days. His phone buzzed. It was Dave. "Dude, I just signed you up on Instagram," the text read. "You're officially Mike_strong. Go viral." Mark rolled his eyes and typed back, "Please stop." The morning of his first gym visit arrived. Mark dressed in his new identity, Mike, the humble newcomer. He told Jess he was heading to check out some cardio, and slipped out the door before she could ask too many questions. Walking into the gym was like entering a foreign country. The walls were plastered with motivational quotes. Some inspiring, some borderline terrifying. The smell of chalk dust hung thick in the air. Loud music pumped through the speakers as sweaty bodies pushed themselves through grueling exercises. Mark felt his confidence waver as he approached the front desk. "Hey," he said, trying to sound casual. "I'm here to sign up." The receptionist, a perky woman with a CrossFit t-shirt that looked painted on, gave him a once-over. "New here? What's your name?" "Mike," Mark said, hoping it sounded natural. "Welcome, Mike. You picked a great time to join. We've got a killer WOD today." Mark blinked. "WOD? What was that?" Sure. Sounds good." As he walked toward the training area, he caught sight of Brandon, the cocky coach, standing tall with his arms crossed, flashing a smile that Mark was pretty sure was meant to intimidate. Brandon glanced at Mark and smirked. "Look who decided to join. Hope you're ready to keep up, newbie." Mark's jaw tightened. This was going to be interesting. Chapter 5. First gym day fumbles. Mark shuffled into the training area, clutching his water bottle like a lifeline. The sound of grunts, clanging weights, and thudding footsteps echoed around the space, making his heart thump a little faster, not from excitement, but from mild panic. A group of gym-goers warmed up in front of him, tossing around terms like AMRAP, snatch, and box jumps. Mark blinked. What language is this? Brandon sauntered over, flexing a bicep and flashing that infuriating smirk. "Hey Mike, first day jitters? Don't worry, you'll be begging for mercy by the end of the WOD." Mark forced a grin. "Just trying to keep up." Brandon chuckled. "You? Keep up? This'll be fun." The workout began, and Mark quickly discovered that his military endurance didn't exactly translate into CrossFit finesse. His attempts at jump rope looked more like a toddler's tantrum. The rowing machine felt like a medieval torture device. And when it came time for box jumps, Mark's legs refused to cooperate, sending him crashing onto the soft mat with an undignified thud. Laughter erupted around him, but not unkindly. One of the gym regulars, a woman named Sarah, gave him an encouraging thumbs up. "Don't worry, Mike. We all start somewhere." Brandon, however, took every opportunity to throw sarcastic comments. "Careful, Mike. We don't want you pulling a muscle trying to reach the bar." Mark gritted his teeth but stayed silent. Instead, he focused on breathing steadily, quietly reminding himself, patience and endurance. By the end of the session, he was exhausted, bruised, and more determined than ever. As he left the gym, Brandon called out, "See you tomorrow, Mike. Ready to prove you belong." Mark looked back with a wry smile. "You're on." Chapter 6, Silent Observation. The next evening, Mark found a quiet spot just outside the gym's big front window. Hidden behind a row of shrubs with a less than stellar view, but enough to catch the action. He wasn't about to reveal himself yet. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed softly, illuminating the sweaty chaos. Jess was in her element, moving through drills with a practiced grace, laughing and chatting with Brandon. Their easy camaraderie was undeniable. Too easy, Mark thought. He watched Brandon lean in a little closer than necessary, his hand brushing Jess's arm with a familiarity that didn't sit right. Jess laughed, tossing her head back, clearly enjoying the attention. Mark's fists clenched loosely at his sides, but he forced himself to breathe evenly, the calm of his reserved days settling over him like a blanket. This was no time for a scene. Instead, he pulled out his phone and tapped a note. Plan the challenge. Wait for the right moment. He had no intention of embarrassing Jess or Brandon. No shouting matches, no wild confrontations. Just a quiet, clean victory that would speak louder than words. The gym's door opened, and a few more members stepped out into the cool evening air. Mark melted back into the shadows, silent but ready. Chapter 7, The Challenge Issued. Mark had been back at the gym for a week now, blending into the background as best as Mike could. He'd endured awkward small talk, confusing workout lingo, and a couple of bruises he'd pretend never happened. But Brandon? He wasn't about to let a mystery newbie go unnoticed. One humid evening after class, as the gym emptied and chatter softened, Brandon swaggered over to Mark, flexing that infuriating grin. "All right, Mike," he said loud enough for a few lingering members to hear. "I've been watching you fumble through the WODs. You've got guts, I'll give you that. But let's see what you're really made of." Mark raised an eyebrow, playing it cool. "What did you have in mind?" Brandon smirked. "A little fitness challenge. You and me. No holds barred. Who can finish the workout faster, with better form, and without crying like a baby?" The gym erupted in quiet murmurs and smirks. Some pulled out their phones, ready to capture the showdown. Mark felt a familiar calm wash over him, like the eye of a storm. "You're on." Brandon's grin grew wider. "Tomorrow night. Same time." As Brandon walked away, Mark pocketed his phone and glanced at the old calendar pinned on the gym wall, counting down to the Community Fitness Challenge. This was his moment. His silent victory in the making. Chapter 8, Training Montage with Humor. The next morning, Mark woke up sore in places he hadn't even known existed. His muscles felt like they'd been rearranged by an angry carpenter. But he smiled to himself. That meant progress. Over the next several days, Mark committed to training in earnest, though it wasn't without its share of comic mishaps. His first attempt at a handstand ended with him toppling sideways into the laundry basket. Jump rope sessions turned into a tangle of limbs and muttered curses. And the kettlebell, the kettlebell, almost became a weapon of accidental destruction when he nearly launched it into the neighbor's yard. Dave showed up one afternoon with a stack of CrossFit for Dummies videos, determined to help. "All right, Mike," Dave said, adjusting his too-tight gym shorts. "We're gonna get you ripped and ready to rumble." Mark nodded, hiding his skepticism. They tried box jumps, but after Mark landed with a grunt, Dave's attempt ended with a faceplant that had them both doubled over in laughter. Despite the setbacks, Mark's endurance improved. His breathing steadied. And beneath the bruises, a quiet confidence grew. By the end of the week, he was ready. Well, mostly. Chapter 9, Gym Dynamics. Walking into the gym on a busy evening, Mark realized that CrossFit was as much a social scene as it was a workout. Clusters of regulars swapped stories about personal records, nutrition plans, and the latest protein shake fads. "Mike, over here." Sarah waved him over. "You've improved. You're practically one of us now." Mark smiled, feeling the smallest flicker of belonging. Still, he kept his guard up. After all, this was Brandon's turf. Brandon, of course, was never far away. He developed a habit of sidling up just when Mark was starting to feel comfortable. "So, Mike, what's your story?" Brandon asked one day, the smirk curling at the edge of his mouth. "Where are you really from?" Mark deflected with a dry chuckle. "Maple Ridge, born and bred." "Sure," Brandon said, unconvinced. "You sure you're not some secret agent or something?" Mark raised an eyebrow. "If I were, would I be here talking to you?" The gym echoed with quiet laughter, and even Brandon had to grin. But Mark noticed something else. Jess had started to glance his way occasionally, curiosity flickering in her eyes. One afternoon, as Mark caught his breath after a particularly brutal set of burpees, Jess approached. "Hey, Mike," she said, offering a small smile. "You're getting really good at this." Mark nodded, saying nothing more than a polite, "Thanks." Her eyes searched his face, but Mark stayed unreadable, keeping his secret close. The silent game was heating up. Chapter 10, Close Calls. Mark was loading plates onto a barbell when he heard Jess's voice behind him. "You remind me of someone," she said. He turned, heart thudding just a little. Jess was studying him with a look he hadn't seen in years. Not suspicion, but interest. It was unsettling. "Just have one of those faces," Mark replied casually, wiping sweat from his brow. Jess tilted her head. "You sure we haven't met?" He gave a light shrug. "Probably passed each other at Save-On." Jess narrowed her eyes. But before she could say more, Brandon strolled up and draped an arm over her shoulder like he owned the air she breathed. "Getting friendly with the new guy?" Brandon said, grinning. "Don't let him fool you. He's got a mysterious vibe, like a guy who keeps a go-bag in his trunk." Mark laughed softly. "Only thing in my trunk is jumper cables and half a bag of grass seed." Jess chuckled, but the look in her eyes lingered longer than the laugh. Later that night, Mark nearly blew his cover again when he got back from the gym and Jess asked what he'd been up to. "Just stopped by Save-On," he said, too quickly. "For 2 hours? Long line. There was a price check. On almonds." Jess squinted. "Almonds? Yeah, organic ones." It was dramatic. She stared a moment longer, then turned back to her laptop. Mark exhaled quietly, then glanced at the calendar on the fridge. The challenge was tomorrow. Time to finish this. Chapter 11, the day of the challenge. The gym buzzed with energy that evening. Word had spread, Coach Brandon versus the mysterious Mike. Some thought it was just a fun stunt. Others sensed something deeper. Either way, everyone wanted to see the match. Mark arrived early, staying quiet, stretching in the corner while others filtered in. Jess stood near the front desk, her eyes flicking from Brandon to Mark, a crease forming between her brows. Brandon strutted through the gym like a rooster in a yard full of hens. "All right, folks, tonight's WOD is a head-to-head. Coach versus challenger. Classic AMRAP. Burpees, box jumps, kettlebell swings. 20 minutes. No mercy." A few people clapped. Phones came out. Sarah mouthed, "Good luck," to Mark from across the room. Mark nodded once. Brandon leaned in as they stood side by side at the start line. "Don't embarrass yourself, Mike. This is my house." Mark didn't answer, just adjusted his grip on the kettlebell and waited for the countdown. 3, 2, 1, go. The gym erupted with noise, the thud of feet hitting the mat, the clang of weights, the pulse of aggressive techno. Brandon went out hard, charging into the reps like a man trying to prove something. Mark started slower, steady, deliberate. Military pace. Unshakable. 10 minutes in, Brandon was ahead, but already gasping. His form slipped. He grunted with every rep, clearly trying to intimidate. Mark, still breathing steady. Focused. Not flashy, just consistent. At 15 minutes, the tide turned. Brandon slowed, stumbling on a box jump, wincing as he missed a rep. Mark overtook him with quiet ease, rep after rep, clean and controlled. The gym got quieter. At 19 minutes, all eyes were on Mark. At 20, the bell rang. Brandon dropped to his knees, wheezing. Mark stood upright, calm, towel draped around his neck. Brandon looked up, red-faced and blinking. Mark offered him a bottle of water and said softly, "Thanks for the workout," and walked out. Chapter 12, The Victory. Mark didn't wait for the claps. He didn't linger for photos or pats on the back. The moment the challenge ended, he grabbed his bag, gave a quiet nod to Sarah, and stepped out into the cool Maple Ridge night like nothing had happened. Inside, Brandon was still hunched over a foam roller, trying to catch his breath, while the crowd murmured in disbelief. A few gym-goers whispered, "Who is that guy?" Someone joked, "He ghosted us like Batman." Jess stood frozen, her water bottle half raised, eyes locked on the door that had just closed behind Mike. Something about the rhythm of his movement, the quiet dignity, it all clicked. Her hand slowly lowered. "Oh my God," she muttered. That was Mark. She didn't say anything to anyone else. She just grabbed her jacket and walked home in silence. Meanwhile, Mark drove through the winding streets, windows cracked, the crisp night air slipping in. No celebration playlist. No triumphant fist pump. Just the hum of tires on pavement and the deep satisfaction of a job done well. At home, he showered, changed, and made a grilled cheese. Ate it standing up like always. Jess came home an hour later, slower than usual. Her eyes searched him, but he didn't offer anything. "Good workout?" she asked, like they were still playing the game. Mark gave her a calm look, not unkind. "Solid cardio." She blinked, then nodded. For the first time in a while, she didn't say much. Chapter 13, Aftermath. The next morning, the gym's group chat was on fire. Who was that guy? Mike is a beast. Did anyone get his IG handle? Brandon, Soren, both muscle and ego, stayed unusually silent. His morning class ran slower, his jokes flatter, his energy just a little deflated. At Turner's Hardware, however, it was business as usual. Mark restocked drill bits and helped Mrs. Hawkins load a bag of mulch into her Civic. The gym drama hadn't reached this corner of town, and that was exactly how he liked it. Dave popped in around lunch, grinning from ear to ear. "Legend," he whispered, handing Mark a muffin. "You just disappeared like vapor. People are calling you the CrossFit ghost." Mark smirked. "Sounds like a limited edition energy drink." "They're trying to find you online," Dave added. "You're a mystery." "Good," Mark said. "Let's keep it that way." At home, things were quieter. Jess moved around him more cautiously now. No more breathless CrossFit stories, no more late gym nights. She made dinner, vegetarian tacos. Mark ate them. They didn't talk about the gym, or Brandon, or anything really. But something had shifted. Not in a cruel way, not even with finality. Just changed. Balanced. Jess seemed smaller somehow. Not weaker, just less certain. Mark, on the other hand, hadn't said a single harsh word. And he didn't need to. He'd won the war without firing a shot. Chapter 14, Quiet Resolution. Sunday morning brought fog and the sound of a distant lawnmower. Mark stood barefoot in the kitchen, sipping coffee and watching crows pick at the lawn. The gym was behind him. The challenge was over. Jess came downstairs wrapped in her robe, her hair tied back like it had been 100 mornings before. But her face held something different. Stillness, maybe even remorse. She leaned against the counter, not speaking right away. Mark waited. Finally, she broke the silence. "It was you, wasn't it?" Mark didn't move. "You tell me." She exhaled, then nodded slowly. "I knew it halfway through. The way you moved. You always moved like that, quiet, calculated. Like you were scanning for exits." He let the corner of his mouth lift slightly. "Old habit." Jess turned away, rubbing her eyes. "I didn't expect you to handle it like that." "No," Mark asked gently. "I thought you'd yell. Or pack a bag. Or throw a weight at him." Mark set his mug down. "No point in yelling. I just needed to remind you who I was." Jess turned back, eyes glossy but clear. "You did." There was a long pause. Nothing dramatic. Just two people standing in a kitchen with too much history and not enough words to fix it. "I'm not proud of what I did," she said softly. "And I'm not asking for forgiveness right now." Mark nodded once. "But I respect the way you handled it. I don't think I deserve that much grace." "You probably didn't," he said simply. "But it wasn't about you." Jess blinked. "What do you mean?" Mark looked out the window again. "It was about me. I just wanted to leave that gym knowing I could still show up, take the hit, and walk out on my own terms." She stood there a moment, then nodded. "So, Where do we go from here? Mark took a breath. I don't know yet, but I do know this house could use a fresh coat of paint. Start there. She gave a soft laugh. Okay. Chapter 15. Back to normal? The following week felt still. Not awkward, not tense, just quiet, like the air after a snowstorm. Mark returned to Turner's Hardware full-time, slipping into the rhythm of everyday life like a worn-in glove. Customers came in looking for screws, wire cutters, fertilizer, none of them asking about kettlebells or protein macros. It was bliss. Dave, of course, wouldn't let it go. You know you could have gone viral, he said one afternoon, leaning against the paint mixing counter with a Slurpee. Just one post. Mystery man destroys cocky coach in local gym showdown. You'd have endorsement deals. Mark raised an eyebrow. For what? Orthopedic shoes and liniment rub. Dave laughed. You're wasted here, man. You should be running stealth ops for Sport Check. Mark shook his head, smirking. I don't need a crowd. I just need peace. And for the most part, he had it. At home, he and Jess moved through the days like friendly roommates, civil, cordial, even cooperative. She gave him space. He didn't ask questions. On Saturday, she helped him repaint the garage without a single passive-aggressive comment. That felt like progress. That night, Mark sat in the backyard with a cold beer and a view of the stars. For the first time in a long time, he didn't feel restless. He didn't need revenge, closure, or an audience. He just needed this. Stillness, space, and the quiet sense that, somehow, he'd won. Chapter 16, Maple Ridge Life Goes On. By the third week, the gym showdown had faded into small-town myth. The regulars at the diner still swapped theories over bottomless coffee. Maybe he was ex-military. Could have been a trainer from the city. I heard he's in witness protection. Mark, meanwhile, kept hammering away at a garden shed order in the back of the hardware store, letting the rumors fly like leaves in the wind. Jess had moved her workouts to a new studio, low-impact strength classes at the rec center. She came home on time now. Less makeup, fewer loud declarations about protein intake. No more Brandon. Mark didn't ask what happened between them. He didn't need to. One evening, while closing up shop, he noticed a familiar face hovering near the paint samples. Marta, the local librarian. Widow, mid-40s, a regular customer with a laugh that always landed a second too late. Hey Mark, she said, holding up a swatch. Is this more eggshell or depression in beige form? He chuckled. It's technically called fog whisper. Of course it is. She smiled. You doing okay these days? He met her eyes and nodded. Yeah, actually, I think I am. Well, if you ever want to whisper about fog over coffee, you know where the library is. Mark smiled, caught a little off guard. Might take you up on that. Back home that night, he rewired the dim kitchen light. Something he'd put off for 2 years. It clicked on immediately. Solid, simple, satisfying. Maybe that's all life needed to be. Chapter 17. Shed Days and Library Cards. Saturday morning found Mark in the backyard, assembling a prefab cedar shed with the same precision he once applied to rifle maintenance. Everything had its place. Each screw was accounted for. His Spotify playlist was all 90s alt-rock and zero regrets. Dave dropped by with a box of Tim Hortons and a grin. Look at you, home improvement Jesus. Need a disciple with a drill. Mark handed him a Phillips head and gestured to the ladder. You're on roof panel duty. By noon, the shed had walls, a roof, and even a little window. They cracked open a couple of root beers and admired the handiwork like it was the Taj Mahal. You know, Dave said, this is better than therapy. Mark nodded. Cheaper, too. Later that afternoon, Mark stopped by the Maple Ridge Library. He hadn't been in years. It smelled the same, like old paper, laminate flooring, and quiet. Marta was behind the desk, reading a paperback thriller. Well, she said, sliding off her glasses. Fog whisper in the flesh. Mark chuckled. Thought I'd get a card. Might be time to brush up on some things. Fiction or fact? He smiled. Surprise me. She handed him a form. You always this cryptic, or is this new? Little of both. By the time he left, he had a card, 3 books, and a low-grade crush he wasn't ready to admit. At home, he made dinner for one, grilled salmon, broccoli, and rice. Nothing fancy, just calm, capable fuel for the next chapter. And for the first time in a long time, the silence in the house didn't feel like punishment. It felt like possibility. Chapter 18. Rumors, Reappearances, and Reprieve. It was a quiet Wednesday at Turner's Hardware when Sheila, the town's fastest gossip disguised as a cashier, sidled up to Mark during his lunch break. "You'll never guess who I saw at Save On." Mark didn't look up from his soup. "I probably won't." "Brandon." That made him pause. "Yep," she continued, slicing her apple with a dramatic flourish. "Back in town. Alone. Looked sweaty. Not CrossFit sweaty, more midlife panic sweaty." Mark blinked slowly. "That's oddly specific." He asked the cashier if they carried goat milk kefir. Said it helped reset his mitochondria. Mark nearly snorted his soup. "Yeah, that tracks." Rumors swirled quickly. Brandon was trying to open a wellness retreat near Golden Ears. Someone said he was handing out flyers outside the bank. Another claimed he tried to recruit someone at the dog park for a forest awakening session. But Mark? He didn't care. He didn't tell Jess. He didn't change his routine. He just kept showing up. At work, at the gym, now quietly using his real name, and once a week at the library. One evening, Marta had a copy of Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance waiting for him. "I thought you might appreciate existential rambling with engine grease." He took it with a grin. "You know me well." "Not yet," she replied with a wink. "But I'm working on it." Later that night, Mark sat on his shed's little porch, book in hand, beer beside him, and the dog he didn't yet own already imagined sleeping at his feet. For once, life didn't feel like something happening to him. It felt like something he was building, quietly, patiently, piece by piece. Chapter 19. New Plans and Old Tools. The following week, Mark spent his evenings reorganizing the garage. Not because it needed it, but because he did. He lined up wrenches by size, oiled an old drill press that hadn't been touched in a decade, and even found the camping gear he'd forgotten he owned. When he stumbled on his army rucksack, stuffed with neatly rolled socks and field manuals, he sat on the cement floor for a while, thumbing through memories. He wasn't that guy anymore, but maybe some parts were still useful. That Friday, Marta stopped by the hardware store. "Got a window that won't shut," she said. "Thought I'd consult the man with the best tool belt in town." Mark raised an eyebrow. "You looking for advice or help?" "Both. And possibly coffee." They made a plan for Saturday afternoon, window first, coffee second. Mark hadn't smiled that wide since before CrossFit had ruined his marriage. After she left, Dave poked his head out from the seasonal aisle, holding a rubber snow shovel like a guitar. "Is that a date I smell?" Mark didn't take the bait. "It's a window consultation." With caffeine? Mark chuckled. "And maybe muffins." That night, he dusted off his woodworking bench. Maybe he'd start making things again. Birdhouses, benches, cutting boards with artisanal flair and names like the Ridge Plank. Not for money, not for attention, just for the joy of creating something solid, where the edges met cleanly, the grain lined up, and nothing fell apart unless you let it. For the first time in years, Mark felt the stirrings of his old self. Not the reservist. Not the betrayed husband. Just the man who liked fixing things. Quietly. Well, Chapter 20. New Beginnings. The sun filtered through the kitchen window, casting warm stripes across the wooden floor. Mark stood by the sink, washing dishes while Jess moved around the house in the background, humming softly. The air between them was lighter now, not quite healed, but more honest. Less heavy. Mark glanced over his shoulder as Jess caught his eye and gave him a small smile. "Thanks for not making a scene," she said quietly. Mark shrugged, a soft smile tugging at his lips. Some battles are best won quietly. Outside, the garden shed stood finished, solid cedar walls, freshly painted with fog whisper on the door. It was more than a shed. It was a symbol of patience, of resilience, of silent victories. Later that day, Mark met Marta at the library for coffee, a stack of books between them and laughter that didn't feel forced. He thought about the future. Not with grand plans or declarations, but with small moments and steady steps. The kind of life you build when you know that sometimes the quietest fight is the strongest.